The entire Elder Scrolls franchise is named after artifacts that most players have never actually thought about. 5 mainline games, dozens of spin-offs, and an entire universe built around objects that almost nobody can explain. So today I'm breaking down everything about what the Elder Scrolls actually are, what they do, and why they might be the most disturbing artifacts in all of gaming. Starting with the fact that they can't even decide what they look like. Here's something that should bother you more than it does. You've probably spent hundreds, maybe thousands of hours in this franchise, and you couldn't describe the thing it's named after. Nobody can. And that's not because the games are vague about it, it's because the Elder Scrolls themselves refuse to be described consistently. What we do know is this: an Elder Scroll manifests as a large cylindrical roll of pale material. Sounds simple enough, but the material itself is neither paper nor parchment in any conventional sense. Nobody in the entire history of Tamriel has been able to identify what it's actually made of. Scholars have studied these things for thousands of years, and the best answer they've come up with is basically we don't know and we probably can't know, which is, not ideal for something you're supposed to read. The exterior of each scroll bears elaborate mystical markings that appear to shift and change depending on the angle you're looking at them. Not like a hologram or a trick of the light, more like the scroll is presenting a different version of itself to every observer at every moment, and we haven't even opened the thing yet. But here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. No two in-universe descriptions of an Elder Scrolls appearance actually match. Some scholars describe them as relatively portable. Others write about them as though they carry a metaphysical weight so dense that a normal person couldn't handle one. Same type of object, completely different accounts. And before you chalk that up to sloppy writing, it's not. The contradiction is the point. The Elder Scrolls actively resist accurate visual categorization. They exist partially outside normal rules of perception, meaning that trying to pin down what one looks like is about as useful as trying to describe a color that doesn't exist. Your brain just isn't built for it. So we have an artifact made of unknown material, covered in symbols that change when you look at them, described differently by every single person who's ever seen one, and apparently impossible to accurately observe. That's just the outside. That's just what the thing looks like when it's rolled up and doing nothing. But if the physical appearance is already breaking the rules of reality, wait until you hear where these things actually came from, where they come from. So the obvious question is, who made them? Every artifact in Tamriel has a creator. The Daedric princes forged their own relics. The Dwemer built their impossible machines. Even the Aedra sacrificed themselves to create the mortal plane. So who sat down and wrote the Elder Scrolls? Nobody. Probably. Maybe. Here's the thing. Even the greatest scholars in Tamriel have been arguing about this for thousands of years, and they've gotten absolutely nowhere. The most grounded explanation is that the Elder Scrolls predate everything. Not just the empires, not just the races, not just recorded history. They may predate the Aedra and Daedra themselves. These scrolls might be older than the gods, older than the beings who literally shaped reality into existence, which immediately raises the question, if the gods didn't make them, and nothing existed before the gods, then how are the scrolls already there? That's where the first theory falls apart and the second one gets weird. Some scholars argue that Elder Scrolls aren't created objects at all. They're fundamental aspects of reality itself. Think of them like gravity or time, not something anyone built, just something that exists because the universe exists. In Elder Scrolls cosmology, there are metaphysical structures called the Wheel and the Tower that essentially organize all of existence. The Elder Scrolls, according to this theory, sit at that same foundational level. They aren't in reality, they are reality, or at least a load-bearing part of it. But wait, there's a third theory, and this is where my brain started leaking out of my ears. Some lore scholars suggest that the Elder Scrolls are manifestations of the universe's own self-awareness, reality keeping a journal, the universe documenting its own existence, its own past, its own possible futures. If that's true, then asking where do the Elder Scrolls come from is like asking where does existence come from. The scrolls don't come from anywhere, they just are. And then you factor in dragon breaks, and whatever sanity you had left evaporates completely. A dragon break is a moment when linear time collapses entirely. Multiple contradictory events happen simultaneously, all versions equally true. The Elder Scrolls have a documented connection to these events, which suggests they exist at least partially outside of time altogether. And if something exists outside of time, it cannot have an origin point. Origins require its before and an after. The scrolls don't play by those rules. Every attempt to trace their genesis loops back into paradox, like trying to find the starting point of a circle. So to summarize, nobody made them. They might be older than gods, they could be reality itself keeping notes, and they may exist outside of time entirely. Cool, glad we cleared that up. But if where they come from is confusing, what they actually contain is somehow worse. What they actually contain. Here's where most people's understanding of the Elder Scrolls completely falls apart. Because when you hear scroll, you think of a document, something with words on it. You read it, you absorb the information, you move on. That's not what's happening here. Not even close. Elder Scrolls contain knowledge that ranges from detailed historical events to prophecies about things that haven't happened yet. Some of them reference events from previous iterations of reality itself, meaning they're recording information about alternative timelines and futures that may or may not come to pass. Already, that's not a normal document. A normal document tells you what happened. These things tell you what happened, what's happening, what will happen, and what happened in a version of reality that got overwritten, all at the same time. But here's the thing, that's not even the weird part. The weird part is that two people can read the exact same Elder Scroll and walk away with completely different information, not different interpretations of the same text like two people arguing about a poem, genuinely different content. The scroll appears to generate or reveal specific knowledge based on who's reading it, their nature, their understanding, their consciousness. Reading an Elder Scroll isn't a passive experience where you sit there and receive data. It's an active, collaborative process between you and the scroll where the information is literally shaped by the observer. Let me put that another way. The scroll doesn't have fixed words on it. It has everything on it, and your mind determines which slice of everything you actually perceive. If that sounds abstract, the Ogma Infinium gives you a useful comparison point. That artifact supposedly contains the knowledge of the ages, but when you actually use it in Skyrim, it forces you to choose a path: might, shadow, or magic. You don't get all three. The knowledge is there, all of it, but you can only access the portion that aligns with your chosen framework. Elder Scrolls work on a similar principle, except there's no menu screen. Your consciousness is the menu. The scroll reads you just as much as you read it, and it delivers information accordingly. This is why scholars in Tamriel can't even agree on what a specific Elder Scroll says. It's not that they're bad at reading, it's that the scroll said something different to each of them. Every account is simultaneously correct and incomplete because no single observer can perceive the totality of what's contained inside, and some of the information in there shouldn't be possible to contain at all. We're talking about records of events that exist outside linear time, futures that haven't been decided, pasts that were erased, realities that branched off and went in a completely different direction. The human mind is built to process one timeline moving in one direction. That's it. Asking a brain to comprehend multiple simultaneous realities and non-linear causality is like asking a calculator to have feelings. The hardware simply does not support it, which is precisely why reading one of these things is so catastrophically dangerous. It's not that the information is cursed or magically toxic, it's that the information is fundamentally incompatible with how mortal minds work. You're not reading forbidden knowledge, you're reading impossible knowledge, and your brain pays the price for trying. But if you think knowing what's inside them sounds bad, wait until you hear what actually happens to the people who try to read one. What happens when you read one? Let's say you find an Elder Scroll. You've got it in your hands, you unroll it. What happens next? Well, nothing good. And honestly, nothing good might be the understatement of the entire franchise. The most well-documented consequence of reading an Elder Scroll is permanent blindness. Not temporary, not your vision gets a little blurry for a few days. Permanent. Your visual cortex essentially overloads trying to process information it was never designed to handle, and the damage is irreversible. Your eyes don't just stop working. The part of your brain responsible for sight burns out like a fuse box connected to the sun, which is, not ideal, but here's the thing. Blindness isn't even the scary part. The lore explicitly states that blindness ensues occasionally when they are read, but other effects can occur. Occasionally, meaning blindness is just one item on a menu of consequences, and the lore absolutely refuses to tell you what the other items are. That's it. That's all you get. Other effects can occur. Thanks for the specificity. Really helpful. It's like a warning label that just says bad things and leaves it at that. And it gets worse, because the scrolls aren't even consistent about what they do to you. The same scroll might produce completely different effects in different readers. One person goes blind, another person experiences something the lore won't even name, a third person reads the exact same scroll on a different day and gets hit with a totally new consequence nobody's ever documented before. There are zero patterns, zero predictability, and zero ways to prepare for what's coming. You could study Elder Scrolls your entire life, read one, and still have absolutely no idea what's about to happen to your brain. But the physical damage, the blindness, that's the part people focus on because it's the part they can understand. The part that genuinely keeps me up at night is the temporal disorientation. Readers of Elder Scrolls report perceiving events outside of linear time, not metaphorically, not I had a weird dream about the future. They become simultaneously aware of multiple realities, multiple timelines, events that haven't happened yet existing alongside events that already did, all crammed into a single moment of consciousness. Your brain, which is built to experience 1 second after another together in a neat little line, suddenly gets forced to experience everything at once. Past, present, future, and apparently some stuff that doesn't fit into any of those categories. Think about that for a second. Going blind means you lose your eyes. Temporal disorientation means you lose your grip on reality itself. Your entire framework for understanding when things happen, whether things happened, whether you're currently in the present or stuck perceiving some alternate timeline where everything went differently, all of that just shatters. And unlike blindness, there's no word for what that condition even is. There's no treatment, there's no coming back from it, because you can't come back to a version of reality you no longer believe is the only one. Reading an Elder Scroll is a one-way door. It transforms your consciousness in ways that cannot be reversed, cannot be adequately described to someone who hasn't experienced it, and cannot be predicted before you open the scroll. Every single person who reads one becomes something fundamentally different from what they were before, whether that means blind, temporally fractured, or something the lore won't even put a name to. And yet there's an entire religious order that has dedicated itself to reading these things on purpose, repeatedly. For generations, the Moth Priests. So here's the question nobody in Tamriel could figure out for centuries. You've got these scrolls that contain the most important knowledge in existence, but reading them destroys you. What do? Do you lock them away forever? Do you pretend they don't exist? No. You build an entire religion around accepting the destruction. And honestly, that might be the most human thing in all of Elder Scrolls lore. The Moth Priests are members of the cult of the Ancestor Moth, an organization that maintains temples specifically dedicated to preserving Elder Scrolls and controlling who gets anywhere near them. They operate out of the Temple of the Ancestor Moths and the libraries of the White Gold Tower, and their entire existence revolves around one goal: figure out how to read these things without immediately losing your mind, or at least lose your mind on a schedule. Here's how it works. A Moth Priest doesn't just walk up to an Elder Scroll and crack it open like a Sunday newspaper. They undergo years of specialized training designed to prepare their minds and bodies for the experience. Meditation techniques, mental conditioning, spiritual preparation, all of it carefully structured to minimize the damage and maximize the amount of useful information they can actually extract from a reading. Think of it like training someone to handle radioactive material. You can't make it safe, you can only make it survivable for a little longer, and for a while, it works. Early in a Moth Priest's career, readings produce profound knowledge with relatively minor consequences. Maybe some disorientation, maybe temporary vision problems. Nothing career-ending. But here's the thing, the damage is cumulative. Every single reading adds to it. Over years, sometimes decades, the toll builds. Their eyesight deteriorates, their perception shifts. The cost of each reading gets steeper than the last, and every Moth Priest knows exactly where this road ends, because eventually, every Moth Priest reads one final Elder Scroll, and that last one takes everything. Complete permanent blindness, zero exceptions. Every priest who walks this path long enough arrives at the same destination. But here's where it gets genuinely beautiful in a way I wasn't expecting. That final reading, the one that takes their sight forever, is described as producing a nearly sublime experience. Not tragedy, not loss, transcendence. The Order doesn't view total blindness as a devastating consequence. They view it as sacred transformation, a kind of spiritual ascension where normal sensory input becomes unnecessary, like shedding training wheels you didn't realize you were still using. Blind Moth Priests don't retire, they don't grieve, they continue their service, considered more spiritually complete than they were before. Let that sink in for a second. These people spend their entire lives knowingly walking toward blindness, and they consider it an honor. Their training doesn't just prepare them to read the scrolls, it prepares them psychologically for the certainty that they will lose their sight. Not the possibility, the certainty. Every initiate who joins the cult of the Ancestor Moth understands the deal from day one. You will go blind. The only question is when. It's a radically different way of thinking about physical senses. Most people would call progressive, permanent sensory destruction a nightmare. The Moth Priests call it the cost of accessing truth, and they pay it willingly, generation after generation. They've essentially built an entire institutional framework around the idea that some knowledge is worth more than sight itself. That seeing reality as it truly is requires giving up the ability to see anything else, which is, kind of the most metal thing any fictional religious order has ever done. But the Moth Priests are scholars and guardians. They study the scrolls, they protect them, they sacrifice for them. What they don't do is explain them. And when you actually look at how Elder Scrolls show up across the games themselves, things get even stranger. The scrolls in the games. Here's something that should bother you more than it does. The Elder Scrolls are the namesake of the entire franchise. 5 mainline games, multiple spin-offs, an MMO, decades of content. And most players have never meaningfully interacted with one. You can sink 500 hours into Oblivion without ever touching a scroll. You can become the Nerevarine in Morrowind and never once hold the object the series is named after. That's like playing through every Mario game and never actually seeing a mushroom mushroom. The most direct encounter any player has ever had with an Elder Scroll happens in Skyrim, during the Elder Knowledge quest. The Dragonborn needs a scroll to learn the Dragon Wren Shout, and to get it, they have to descend into Blackreach, navigate an entire underground Dwemer city, and eventually reach the Tower of Mzark. The Tower of Mzark isn't just a vault, it's a purpose-built containment facility. The Dwemer, a civilization obsessed with understanding and controlling the fundamental mechanics of reality, constructed an entire tower to house a single Elder Scroll. And the retrieval process isn't open door, grab scroll. You have to solve a puzzle involving focused light beams, rotating lenses, and mechanical contraptions that redirect energy in precise sequences. The Dwemer essentially built a giant metaphysical containment unit, and they were arguably the most advanced civilization Tamriel has ever seen. That's how seriously they took storing one of these things. This makes sense when you consider what towers represent in Elder Scrolls lore. Towers are metaphysically significant structures where the barrier between normal reality and whatever exists beyond it becomes thin. The Crystal Tower on Somerset Isle, the White Gold Tower in Cyrodiil, Red Mountain in Morrowind. These aren't just tall buildings, they're anchoring points for reality itself. So if you're going to store an object that exists partially outside of time and space, you put it somewhere reality is already flexible enough to accommodate it. You don't shove it in a cupboard. But here's where the whole thing falls apart in the most entertaining way possible. After navigating Blackreach, solving the Dwemer light puzzle, and extracting an artifact that an entire civilization built a tower to contain, the Dragonborn just picks it up, puts it in their inventory, right next to 40 wheels of cheese, 17 iron daggers, and a pair of boots they've been meaning to sell since level 8. You can drop it on the floor of your house in Whiterun. You can leave it in a barrel in Riften and forget about it entirely. The lore says reading one will literally burn your eyes out of your skull. The lore says entire religious orders spend their lives preparing just to safely look at the words inside. The lore says the Dwemer built a tower with a precision light puzzle to keep one contained. And the game says sure, but also it weighs 20 pounds and fits in your pocket. This isn't a criticism, it's actually kind of the point. If the scrolls worked the way the lore describes, you couldn't pick one up without going permanently blind. You couldn't carry one without it warping reality around you. The quest wouldn't end with you obtaining the scroll. It would end with you becoming a cautionary tale. But Skyrim is a game, and games need to be playable. So the Elder Scroll becomes an inventory item with a weight value and a quest marker. And honestly, that compromise is part of what makes the Elder Scrolls so fascinating as a concept. The games can hint at what these objects truly are. They can build elaborate puzzles and ancient containment towers and blind monk orders to gesture at the enormity of what you're holding. But at the end of the day, it has to fit in a menu screen next to your potions. The full weight of an Elder Scroll will always be restrained by the simple fact that someone needs to press A to pick it up. Which means the real nature of the Elder Scrolls exists somewhere the games can't take you. And if you think the games are vague about what these things actually are, wait until you hear what the lore scholars have to say, because they don't agree on anything. Why? Nobody actually knows. So after everything we've covered, you'd think we could piece together a definitive answer. We know what they look like, we know where they've shown up, we know what happens when you read one, we know there's an entire religious order dedicated to studying them. Surely, with all of that, somebody in Tamriel has figured out what these things actually are. Turns out, no. And here's the thing, it's not because nobody's tried. Moth priests have spent centuries documenting their readings. Imperial scholars have written entire libraries worth of analysis. Independent researchers across every province have contributed their own findings. And the result of all that collective effort is a pile of accounts that directly contradict each other on almost every fundamental point. How many scrolls exist? Depends who you ask. Can they be destroyed? Nobody agrees. Do they record the past, predict the future, or create reality? Yes, no, and also somehow all three at once. But here's where it gets complicated. These contradictions aren't the result of sloppy scholarship. They're not mistakes waiting to be corrected by some future researcher with better tools. The contradictions are the accurate description. If Elder Scrolls exist partially outside linear time, and they record information about multiple possible realities simultaneously, then a single consistent account of what they contain would actually be wrong. The only honest description of an object that exists across multiple states of reality at once is a description that contradicts itself. Every conflicting report is paradoxically correct. And then there's Chim. Chim is one of the deepest concepts in all of Elder Scrolls lore. explore. It describes a state where a being achieves total, perfect understanding of their own nature and the nature of reality itself. You see the wheel, you see yourself as a spoke within it, and you comprehend the entire structure of existence from the inside, except there's a catch. That level of understanding means recognizing that you, as an individual, are not truly separate from the larger structure of reality, and if you fully internalize that knowledge, you face two outcomes. Either you achieve Qiyam and maintain your sense of self through sheer force of will, which is extraordinarily rare, or you zero sum. You simply stop existing because you've realized there was never a you to begin with. Now, apply that to Elder Scrolls. If fully understanding what an Elder Scroll is requires the kind of total cosmic awareness that Chim represents, then complete knowledge of the scrolls might be fundamentally incompatible with being a person who can hold knowledge. The mystery isn't unsolved, it's unsolvable. Not because the answer is hidden, but because the answer and the ability to comprehend it cannot exist in the same mind at the same time, which is, not ideal for the research community. This is what makes the Elder Scrolls genuinely brilliant as world building. They're not mysterious because the developers forgot to write an explanation. They're mysterious because they were designed from the ground up to be unexplainable. They function simultaneously as magical artifacts within a fantasy universe and as philosophical puzzles about the hard limits of knowledge itself. They are objects that ask, can something exist that is real but permanently beyond understanding? And then answer it by simply being that thing. And that's why the franchise carries their name. Not because Elder Scrolls are the most powerful artifacts in Tamriel. Not because they are the most dangerous or the most ancient. The series is called the Elder Scrolls because these objects represent the fundamental unknowability sitting at the center of the entire universe. Every quest you complete, every dungeon you clear, every faction you join, all of it takes place in a world built on top of a mystery that cannot be resolved. The scrolls are the reminder that no matter how much you learn about Tamriel, there's something at its core that you will never, ever fully understand. And honestly, that's exactly what makes it worth exploring. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.